Hi, I'm Marcus. 5 days ago, my sister Jessica sent me a text from her poolside vacation in Maui that nearly broke me. Just took your promotion. You're finished, loser. Hope you enjoyed playing second fiddle, because now everyone knows who the real talent is. But just 2 weeks before that message, she'd sat in my living room, tears streaming down her face, begging me to help her save her career. She was drowning, she said. The quarterly reports were a disaster, her team was falling apart, and upper management was asking questions she couldn't answer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Could I please, just this once, share my client's strategy presentation with her? Just to give her some ideas, she promised. She'd make it her own, of course. I should have known better. I should have remembered that Jessica had been taking credit for my work since we were kids building science fair projects in our garage. But when family asks for help, you help, right? That's what I thought, until her text arrived, sent from a 5-star resort she could suddenly afford, celebrating the executive position that should have been mine. The morning it all started, I was sitting in my cubicle at Henderson Associates, the same grey fabric walls I'd been staring at for 3 years, when my phone buzzed with Jessica's name. I almost didn't answer. My sister and I had what you might generously call a complicated relationship. She was the golden child, the one who always landed on her feet, while I was the steady, reliable one who cleaned up her messes. But blood is thicker than water, or so I kept telling myself. Marcus, thank God you picked up. Her voice was shaky, almost breathless. I need to see you, tonight. It's important. I glanced at the stack of portfolio analyses on my desk, the quarterly presentation I'd been perfecting for weeks spread across my monitor. Jess, I'm swamped. The Peterson Group presentation is Monday, and I'm still fine-tuning the risk assessment models. Please. The word came out small, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard from Jessica since we were teenagers. I'll explain everything when I see you. Just give me an hour. Something in her tone made me pause. Jessica was many things, manipulative, self-centered, opportunistic, but she was rarely genuinely scared. All right, 7 o'clock at my place. That evening when I opened my apartment door, I barely recognized the woman standing there. Jessica's usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her designer blazer wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her green eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She clutched a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. You look terrible, I said, stepping aside to let her in. She managed a weak laugh. Thanks for the pep talk, brother. My apartment was modest, nothing like the luxury condo Jessica rented downtown. 2 bedrooms, hand-me-down furniture from our parents, and a kitchen table I'd assembled myself with questionable success. But it was mine, bought with money I'd earned through late nights and weekend work, while Jessica had been partying her way through business school on Dad's dime. Coffee? I offered, already heading toward the kitchen. Something stronger if you have it. I poured 2 glasses of the bourbon our father had given me for Christmas, a rare moment of acknowledgement that I'd actually accomplished something worth celebrating. Jessica took a large sip and set the glass down with shaking hands. I'm in trouble, Marcus, real trouble. I sat across from her at the wobbly table, studying her face. Jessica had always been beautiful, the kind of effortless beauty that opened doors and softened consequences. But tonight she looked brittle, like she might shatter if I spoke too loudly. What kind of trouble? She opened the portfolio and spread several documents across the table. Financial reports, performance metrics, email printouts, even upside down. I could see the red numbers bleeding across the pages like wounds. My division is hemorrhaging money, has been for months. The client retention rate is at an all-time low, and 3 of our biggest accounts are threatening to walk. She ran her fingers through her hair, destroying what was left of her ponytail. Harrison called me into his office yesterday. He wants a complete turnaround strategy by next week, or he's recommending my termination to the board. Richard Harrison was the senior vice president at Meridian Financial, the investment firm where Jessica had landed her dream job straight out of graduate school. While I'd been grinding through entry-level positions and working my way up at Henderson Associates, she'd walked into a management role making twice my salary. Life had always been easier for Jessica. "I'm sorry, Jess, that sounds stressful, but I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. I've tried everything. The whole team is looking at me like I'm some kind of fraud, waiting for me to fail. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am a fraud." This was new territory. Jessica had never admitted weakness, never acknowledged that anything in her charmed life might be difficult. I found myself leaning forward, genuinely concerned despite our history. "What do you need from me?" "I know about the Peterson Group presentation." The words hit me like ice water. "How do you know about Peterson Group?" "Mom mentioned it last Sunday at dinner. Said you'd been working on some big client pitch that could change everything for you." Jessica's eyes met mine for the first time since she'd arrived. "I did some research. Peterson Group manages over $2 billion in assets. Landing them would be huge for Henderson and Associates." I nodded slowly. "It would be the biggest account in the firm's history. Make or break for a lot of careers, including mine." "I need to see your presentation." The request hung in the air between us like smoke. I stared at her, trying to process what she was asking. "Jess, that's completely confidential client material. I can't just—" "I'm not asking you to give me your clients or steal your thunder," she interrupted, leaning forward desperately. "I just need ideas, inspiration, a framework I can adapt for my own situation. Please, Marcus. I'm drowning here." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. 3 years of 60-hour weeks had gone into building my reputation at Henderson and Associates. The Peterson Group presentation wasn't just a pitch. It was the culmination of everything I'd learned about risk management, portfolio optimization, and client psychology. It was my ticket to the senior analyst position that had been dangled in front of me for months. "This presentation could change my whole career," I said without turning around. "I know, and I'm not asking you to risk that. I just need help understanding how to structure a turnaround strategy. You've always been brilliant with numbers, with seeing patterns other people miss." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've made mistakes, Marcus, big ones. But if I lose this job, I lose everything. The condo, the car, the life I've built. I'll have to move back in with Mom and Dad like some kind of failure." I turned back to face her. Jessica's mask had completely slipped now, revealing the frightened woman underneath. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort from her big brother. "If I show you this, you have to promise me it stays between us, and whatever you create for Harrison has to be completely different. Your own work." Relief flooded her features. "Of course, I promise. I just need to see how a real professional structures this kind of presentation, how you think through the problems." Against every instinct screaming in my head, I walked to my home office and retrieved the laptop containing 3 weeks of intensive research and analysis. The Peterson Group presentation was 27 slides of carefully crafted strategy, supported by data I'd gathered from sources most people didn't even know existed. It represented sleepless nights, missed dinners, and the kind of obsessive attention to detail that had always set me apart from my peers. Jessica scooted her chair close to mine as I opened the file. Her perfume was the same one she'd worn since college, expensive and floral, the kind that announced her presence before she entered a room. I clicked to the first slide, Portfolio Optimization in Volatile Markets, a comprehensive risk management framework. "Oh my God, Marcus," she breathed, her eyes scanning the screen. "This is incredible. Look at these projections."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
For the next hour, I walked her through each section. The market analysis that had taken me 2 weeks to compile, the risk assessment models I'd developed based on emerging economic indicators, the client psychology framework that explained why traditional investment strategies were failing in the current market. Jessica asked intelligent questions, took notes on her phone, and occasionally whistled softly at particularly impressive data visualizations. "This section on behavioral finance is genius," she said, pointing to slide 15. "I never would have thought to approach client resistance from this angle. Despite my reservations, I found myself enjoying the conversation. It had been months since anyone at Henderson Associates had shown genuine appreciation for my work. My immediate supervisor, Greg Thompson, was the type of manager who took credit for his team's successes and blamed them for his failures. Watching Jessica's face light up as she understood the implications of my research felt like the validation I'd been craving. "How did you think to cross-reference the Federal Reserve meeting minutes with client withdrawal patterns?" she asked. "Pattern recognition. I noticed that certain types of investors tend to panic sell within 72 hours of hawkish Fed statements, regardless of their portfolio's actual performance. If you can predict that behavior, you can position your clients to benefit from the market correction that follows. That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." She turned to look at me, and for a moment her expression was the same one she'd worn when I'd helped her with calculus homework in high school. "You're wasted at Henderson and Associates. You know that. You should be running your own fund." The compliment warmed me more than it should have. Jessica was many things, but she wasn't stupid about business. If she was impressed, maybe the presentation really was as strong as I hoped. By 9 o'clock we'd been through the entire deck twice. Jessica had filled several pages with notes, diagrams, and what looked like the beginnings of her own strategic framework. She seemed transformed from the broken woman who'd arrived 2 hours earlier. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her natural confidence was reasserting itself. "This is exactly what I needed," she said, closing her notebook and standing to gather her things. "I can't thank you enough, Marcus. You might have just saved my career. Just remember our agreement. Whatever you present to Harrison has to be your own work." She paused in the doorway and turned back, her expression serious. "Of course, I would never do anything to hurt you, Marcus. You're my brother. We look out for each other." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table finishing the bourbon and reviewing my presentation one more time. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant I had the weekend to make final adjustments before Monday's pitch. The Peterson Group executives were flying in from Dallas specifically to hear our proposal. 3 months of preliminary meetings and relationship building had led to this moment. I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom, but sleep didn't come easily. Something about Jessica's visit felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Maybe it was how quickly she'd rebounded from despair to confidence. Maybe it was the way she'd asked such specific questions about proprietary methodologies. Or maybe it was just the lingering paranoia that came from years of watching my sister land on her feet while I struggled for every small victory. Saturday morning, I tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on preparation. I reviewed every slide, practiced my delivery in front of the bathroom mirror, and researched the Peterson Group executives who would be in the room. James Peterson, the founder, was known for asking unexpected questions designed to test whether presenters truly understood their own material. His daughter, Sarah Peterson Williams, handled the day-to-day operations and had a reputation for cutting through marketing speak to focus on real results. This wasn't the kind of audience that would be impressed by flashy graphics or empty promises. Sunday afternoon, while I was running final checks on my data sources, my phone rang. "Mom? Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Nervous but ready. This could really change things for me. I'm so proud of you, Marcus. Your father and I both are. Jessica told us about your presentation when she came by for dinner last night. She said it was the most impressive thing she'd ever seen." A chill ran down my spine. Jessica came by for dinner. Oh yes, she seemed so much better than she did earlier in the week. Much more optimistic about work. She even mentioned she might have some exciting news to share soon. I managed to finish the conversation without revealing my growing unease, but by the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. There was no reason for Jessica to be optimistic about work unless she'd figured out how to solve her problems at Meridian Financial. And there was no reason for her to be discussing my presentation with our parents unless she was planning something. I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. Jessica had promised to create her own material. She wouldn't be stupid enough to plagiarize my work directly, especially when she knew I'd be presenting to Peterson Group on Monday. But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. Monday morning arrived gray and rainy, the kind of Seattle weather that made everything feel more difficult than it should. I arrived at Henderson Associates 30 minutes early, reviewing my notes one final time in the empty conference room. The Peterson Group delegation was scheduled to arrive at 10 o'clock, which gave me just enough time to set up the presentation system and check all the technical details. Greg Thompson appeared in the doorway at 9:45, straightening his tie and running a hand through his thinning hair. "Ready for this, Marcus?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good. This is our shot to move into the big leagues. Don't screw it up." The Peterson Group executives arrived precisely on time, professional but friendly, the kind of people who managed billions of dollars with the same calm demeanor they might use to order coffee. James Peterson was smaller than I'd expected from his photos, but his handshake was firm and his eyes sharp. Sarah Peterson Williams carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never had to prove she belonged in any room. "We're looking forward to your presentation," James said as we settled around the conference table. "We've heard interesting things about Henderson and Associates." I launched into my opening explaining the current market challenges and why traditional investment strategies were failing sophisticated clients. The first 15 minutes went perfectly. James asked 2 clarifying questions that demonstrated he was following my logic, and Sarah made notes on what appeared to be the key points. Greg sat at the far end of the table, trying to look like he understood the technical details. Then James Peterson's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and showed the screen to his daughter. Sarah's expression changed immediately, her eyebrows drawing together as she read whatever message had appeared. "I'm sorry," James said, looking up from the phone. "We're going to need to pause for a moment." The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows. Sarah was typing rapidly on her own phone, her face growing more troubled with each passing second. "Is everything all right?" Greg asked, his voice tight with anxiety. James Peterson looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Chen, I'm afraid we need to discuss something before we continue. We just received some concerning information about this presentation." My mouth went dry. "What kind of information?" Sarah turned her phone toward me, and I saw a screenshot of what looked like a presentation slide. My presentation slide. The one about behavioral finance and client psychology, complete with my proprietary data analysis and the specific Federal Reserve correlation I'd discovered. This slide was presented to potential investors at Meridian Financial this morning, Sarah said quietly. "By someone named Jessica Chen. Any relation?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at the phone screen, reading my own words, seeing my own research, but branded with Meridian Financial's logo instead of Henderson and Associates. "She's my sister," I managed to say. James Peterson closed his laptop with a soft click. "Mr. Chen, we appreciate your time, but Meridian Financial has already pitched us this exact strategy. We can't move forward with what appears to be duplicated material." The meeting ended 5 minutes later with polite handshakes and promises to stay in touch, but I could see in their eyes that Henderson and Associates had just lost the biggest opportunity in the firm's history. Greg escorted them to the elevator without looking at me, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing anger. I sat alone in the conference room after they left, staring at my laptop screen and trying to process what had just happened. Jessica hadn't just taken inspiration from my presentation, she'd stolen it outright, rebranded it, and used it to save her own career while destroying mine. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and my hands trembled as I opened it. Thanks for the help, little brother. Presentation went great this morning. Harrison loved it so much, he's recommending me for the executive vice president position. Sometimes the best person really does win. I read the message 3 times before the full impact hit me. Not only had she stolen my work, but she'd been planning this betrayal from the moment she sat crying in my apartment. The tears, the vulnerability, the desperate plea for help, it had all been an act designed to get access to my presentation. A second message appeared: don't even think about crying plagiarism. I made enough changes that no one will believe you. Besides, who's going to take the word of a junior analyst over an executive VP? Then a third: by the way, I'm celebrating in Maui this week.
The promotion comes with a nice bonus. Enjoy explaining to your boss why you lost Peterson Group. Greg Thompson appeared in the doorway, his face red with barely controlled fury. My office, now the next hour, was the longest of my professional life. Greg didn't yell, which somehow made it worse. He spoke in a calm, disappointed tone as he explained how the Peterson Group debacle had embarrassed the entire firm. How could I have been so careless with confidential client material? How could I let a competitor get access to our proprietary strategies? Did I understand that this kind of breach could result in legal action? I trusted you with this presentation, Marcus. The whole senior partnership trusted you, and you've made us all look like amateurs. I tried to explain what had happened, how Jessica had manipulated me, but the words sounded weak even to my own ears. The bottom line was simple: I'd shown confidential material to someone outside the firm, and that material had been used against us. Intent didn't matter. Results didn't matter. Only the breach of trust mattered. I'm putting you on administrative leave pending a full review, Greg said finally. Security will escort you out. We'll mail your personal belongings. Walking through the Henderson Associates lobby with a security guard felt like a perp walk. Colleagues I'd worked with for 3 years avoided eye contact or watched with a mixture of sympathy and relief that it wasn't happening to them. The grey cubicle walls that had felt like a prison that morning now seemed like a sanctuary I'd thrown away through my own stupidity. Outside on the sidewalk, rain soaking through my suit jacket, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what Jessica had done. She hadn't just stolen my presentation, she'd destroyed my reputation, my career prospects, and possibly my entire future in financial services. All while pretending to be the vulnerable little sister who needed her big brother's help. That evening, sitting in my empty apartment with a bottle of bourbon and my laptop, I did something I'd never done before. I started researching Jessica's career at Meridian Financial, digging through public records, SEC filings, and industry publications. If she thought this was over, if she thought she could destroy my life and celebrate on a beach in Hawaii, she was about to learn exactly how thorough her anal retentive big brother could be when properly motivated. The first thing I discovered was that Jessica's division hadn't been failing as dramatically as she'd claimed. The numbers were bad, but not catastrophically so. Certainly not terminal enough to justify the kind of desperate measures she'd described. She'd been in trouble, yes, but not the career-ending kind of trouble that would drive someone to risk everything on a stolen presentation. The second thing I found was more interesting. Meridian Financial had been courting the Peterson Group for months, just like Henderson Associates. The difference was that they'd been struggling to develop a competitive strategy. Their previous presentations had been, according to industry gossip, uninspired rehashes of conventional wisdom that failed to impress sophisticated investors. Jessica hadn't stolen my presentation out of desperation. She'd stolen it because she knew exactly how valuable it was and how much it would enhance her position at Meridian Financial. The tears, the vulnerability, the family loyalty she'd appealed to means it had all been a calculated performance, designed to gain access to information she couldn't develop herself. As I sat there in the dark, rain pattering against my windows and bourbon burning in my throat,
I realized something important. Jessica might have won this battle, but she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd underestimated her anal retentive, detail-obsessed big brother, and she'd forgotten that everything she'd just accomplished was built on a foundation of fraud that could be exposed with the right evidence and the right timing. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Not a resignation letter or a job application, but something else entirely. A detailed timeline of events, starting with Jessica's visit to my apartment and ending with the Peterson Group meeting. Screenshots of our text messages. Copies of my original presentation files with timestamps proving when they'd been created. Documentation of every piece of evidence that could prove what had really happened. Jessica thought she'd buried me quietly, that I'd stay silent and ashamed while she celebrated her stolen victory. But she'd forgotten something crucial about the brother she'd just betrayed. I didn't just analyze financial markets for a living. I was very, very good at finding patterns other people missed. And I'd just found the most important pattern of my life. The rain kept falling outside my window, but for the first time since that disastrous Monday morning, I was smiling. Jessica had taught me something valuable during our childhood together, something she'd probably forgotten but I never had. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't immediate. Sometimes you had to wait, plan and strike when your opponent least expected it. My phone buzzed with another message from Jessica, a photo this time showing her lounging by a pool with a tropical drink in her hand and a smug smile on her face. The caption read, "Life is good when you know how to play the game. Thanks again, little brother." I looked at the photo for a long moment, memorizing every detail, then I saved it to my evidence folder and continued typing. Jessica had always been good at playing games, but she'd just made the mistake of playing one with someone who understood the rules better than she did. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 2 weeks of unemployment had turned my apartment into a war room. Every surface was covered with printouts, financial documents, and handwritten timelines tracking Jessica's movements through Meridian Financial's corporate structure. I'd become obsessed with understanding exactly how deep her deception went, and what I'd discovered was far worse than simple plagiarism. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was cross-referencing SEC filings with internal Meridian Financial newsletters I'd obtained through a former colleague. Jessica's promotion to executive vice president hadn't just been about impressing Harrison with my stolen presentation. She'd been systematically positioning herself for months, cultivating relationships with board members and undermining her immediate supervisor, David Walsh, through carefully planted rumors about his competence. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Seattle number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Marcus Chen?" The voice was female, professional but nervous. Speaking. "My name is Dr. Sarah Hoffman. I'm a portfolio analyst at Meridian Financial. I got your number from Tom Bradley at Pacific Northwest Financial Services. He said you might be able to help me with something." Tom Bradley was a former Henderson Associates colleague who'd jumped ship 6 months earlier. We'd kept in touch, mostly commiserating about the challenges of working for established firms that valued politics over performance. "What kind of help?" "It's about your sister, Jessica Chen." Sarah's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "I need to meet with you, in person. What I have to tell you could get me fired, but I think you deserve to know the truth." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, far enough from the financial district that we wouldn't accidentally encounter anyone from either of our professional circles. Sarah turned out to be a slight woman in her early 30s with prematurely gray hair and intelligent brown eyes that darted nervously around the cafe before settling on my face. "I know what happened with Peterson Group," she said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. "The whole office knows." Jessica made sure everyone knew. "What do you mean?" "She's been bragging about how she outsmarted Henderson Associates,
how she used her family connections to gain access to confidential strategies and beat you to the biggest account in the Pacific Northwest. Sarah's fingers wrapped around her coffee mug like she was trying to warm herself. She thinks it's funny. She actually called you pathetic in front of the entire executive team. The words hit harder than I'd expected. It was one thing to know Jessica had betrayed me. It was another to learn she'd humiliated me publicly while doing it. Why are you telling me this? Sarah took a deep breath. Because what Jessica did to you is just the beginning. She's destroying careers left and right, and no one seems willing to stop her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. David Walsh, my direct supervisor, trained me when I started at Meridian 3 years ago. He's brilliant, ethical, and one of the few people in management who actually cares about developing younger talent. She opened the folder to reveal what looked like internal performance reviews and email chains. Jessica's been systematically sabotaging David for months, intercepting his emails to clients, modifying his reports before they reach senior management, even spreading rumors that he's drinking during work hours. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. 2 weeks ago, she presented a comprehensive analysis of departmental inefficiencies that recommended David's immediate termination. Want to guess where that analysis came from? She slid a document across the table. It was a performance improvement framework I recognized immediately because I'd developed something nearly identical during my time at Henderson Associates. The methodology, the data visualization approach, even some of the specific language was lifted directly from a presentation I'd given at an industry conference 8 months earlier. She's been mining your work for months. Sarah continued. Every presentation you've given, every paper you've published, every innovative approach you've developed. She's been repackaging it all and using it to build her reputation at Meridian. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the documents, page after page of my ideas, my methodologies, my original research, all rebranded with Jessica's name and used to destroy innocent people's careers. How long have you known about this? I started putting it together after the Peterson Group incident. Something about Jessica's sudden strategic brilliance felt off, so I started digging. That's when I found Tom Bradley's contact information in David's files. Tom mentioned you'd developed some of these frameworks, so I started comparing timelines. Sarah leaned forward intently. Marcus, she's been stealing from you for over a year, maybe longer.
The scope of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't an opportunistic sister taking advantage of a moment of vulnerability. This was a calculated, long-term campaign of intellectual theft that had been used to build Jessica's entire professional reputation. What happened to David Walsh? Terminated yesterday. 22 years with the company, gone overnight. Jessica personally delivered the news and offered to handle the transition of his responsibilities. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. He trained me, Marcus. He believed in me when no one else would. And now he's updating his LinkedIn profile and trying to figure out how to explain to his wife why they might lose their house. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. What do you want from me? Help me expose her. I have documentation, but I need someone who understands the technical aspects of what she's been stealing. Someone who can prove these ideas originated elsewhere. Sarah's voice was steady now, determined. I can't do this alone. She's too well connected, too politically savvy. But if we work together, if we can prove a pattern of intellectual theft and professional sabotage, we might be able to stop her. The smart move would have been to walk away. I was already unemployed and facing potential legal action from Henderson and Associates. Getting involved in an office politics war at Meridian Financial would only complicate my situation further. But as I looked at Sarah's earnest face and thought about David Walsh updating his LinkedIn profile, I realized this had stopped being about my hurt feelings or damaged pride. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Jessica's presenting her strategic vision for the entire Pacific Northwest Division to the board next month. If that presentation goes well, they're promoting her to regional vice president. She'll have authority over hundreds of millions in assets and direct influence over dozens of careers. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a calendar entry. We have 3 weeks to build a case that will convince the board she's not who they think she is. Over the next hour, Sarah walked me through Jessica's rise at Meridian Financial with the precision of a forensic accountant. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Every major success Jessica had achieved could be traced back to stolen intellectual property, manipulated data, or deliberate sabotage of potential rivals. She'd built her reputation on a foundation of fraud so extensive that unraveling it would require weeks of meticulous documentation. The challenge is proving intent, Sarah explained as we prepared to leave the cafe. Smart plagiarism is hard to prosecute. She's always changed just enough to maintain plausible deniability. What if we could prove she had access to the original source material before her own versions appeared? That would be ideal, but how? It's not like she's saving email receipts that say thanks for the stolen presentation, brother. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Sarah, you obviously don't know my sister very well. Jessica's biggest weakness has always been her ego. She can't resist bragging about how clever she is, especially when she thinks no one important is listening. That evening, I called Tom Bradley and explained the situation. Tom had worked briefly with Jessica during a joint project between Henderson Associates and Meridian Financial, and his assessment was uncharitable but accurate. Jessica Chen is the most dangerous type of corporate sociopath, he said bluntly. Smart enough to identify valuable ideas, ruthless enough to steal them, and charming enough to convince people she's the victim when challenged. But she's also incredibly arrogant. If you can get her talking, she'll probably incriminate herself. What do you mean? She loves explaining how she's outsmarted people. It's like a compulsion. Get her comfortable, maybe a little drunk, and ask her about her recent successes. She'll tell you exactly how she did it because she's proud of it. The plan that emerged over the next few days was elegant in its simplicity. Jessica would be returning from Hawaii on Friday, and our parents were hosting their annual summer barbecue on Saturday. Family events were the one place where Jessica's professional guard came down, where she relaxed enough to speak honestly about her schemes and victories. Sarah would position herself at a nearby table at the restaurant where Jessica typically went for drinks after family events. She'd record everything using a high-quality audio app while I kept Jessica talking about her career successes. It wasn't legally admissible evidence, but it would give us the framework we needed to build a comprehensive case. Friday afternoon, I received the text I'd been expecting. Jessica, presumably back from her Hawaiian celebration, wanted to grab drinks to clear the air about our recent misunderstanding. Her tone was magnanimous, almost patronizing, like she was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence. Let's meet at Sullivan's on Pine, 7 p.m. I'll buy the first round. Sullivan's was Jessica's favorite upscale bar, the kind of place where investment bankers went to see and be seen. It was also loud enough that recording conversations would be challenging, but Sarah had assured me her equipment could handle ambient noise. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table with clear sightlines to the bar area where Sarah would be positioned. She appeared 5 minutes later, dressed like any other young professional unwinding after a long week. We made brief eye contact, but otherwise maintained the fiction that we were strangers. Jessica arrived precisely on time, elegant in a way that money and confidence could purchase. Her tan was perfect, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that looked effortless, but probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and navy blazer that screamed expensive taste and executive authority. "Marcus," she said, leaning in for a hug that smelled like designer perfume and tropical sunscreen. "You look terrible. The unemployment thing really isn't working for you. Thanks for the pep talk." She ordered 2 glasses of their most expensive bourbon, the kind of casual extravagance that was meant to demonstrate her improved circumstances. "I wanted to talk because I feel bad about how things went down. You're my brother,
and family should support each other. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd destroyed my career, and was now presenting herself as the magnanimous sister extending an olive branch. Support each other. Interesting phrase coming from you. Look, I know you're upset about the Peterson Group situation, but business is business. Sometimes opportunities present themselves and you have to be ready to capitalize. She sipped her bourbon and leaned back in her chair. I'm sorry you couldn't handle the competition. Competition implies a level playing field. Oh please, you're not seriously going to play the victim card, are you? No one forced you to show me that presentation. You made a choice, and it didn't work out the way you expected. Her green eyes sparkled with amusement. Besides, it's not like I copied it word for word. I improved it significantly. How exactly did you improve it? The question was perfectly pitched. Not accusatory enough to make her defensive, but interested enough to appeal to her ego. Jessica's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm she usually reserved for discussing her favorite designer handbags. The behavioral finance section was brilliant, don't get me wrong, but it was too academic. Real clients don't care about Federal Reserve correlation studies. They want to know how the strategy will affect their quarterly returns. She gestured expansively with her glass. I streamlined the presentation, focused on practical applications, and added case studies from my own client relationships. That must have impressed Harrison. Harrison was blown away. He said it was the most innovative strategic framework he'd seen in 15 years at Meridian. Jessica's smile was radiant with self-satisfaction. He actually asked if I'd developed it myself, or if I'd worked with consultants. I told him it was all original research. Across the bar, Sarah was nursing a glass of wine and occasionally glancing at her phone, the perfect picture of a professional checking work emails during happy hour. Original research. That's one way to describe it. Marcus, you need to understand something about how this industry actually works. Ideas are commodities. What matters is execution, presentation, and timing. You had a good concept, but you would have buried it in academic jargon and lost your audience in the first 5 minutes. She leaned forward conspiratorially. I took your raw material and turned it into something that could actually influence real decisions affecting billions of dollars. Is that what you told yourself when you sabotaged David Walsh? The question hit its target. Jessica's confident expression flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. How do you know about David? Word travels in this industry. People talk. She recovered quickly, but I'd seen the momentary panic in her eyes. David Walsh was incompetent. His performance reviews were terrible, his client retention was abysmal, and his strategic vision was stuck in the 1990s. I simply documented the obvious and presented it to management. Using analytical frameworks you developed yourself, of course. The lie came easily, automatically. I've been working on departmental efficiency models for months. David's situation was just the perfect case study to demonstrate their effectiveness. I recognized the methodology she was describing because I'd published a paper on similar approaches in the Journal of Financial Strategy 6 months earlier.
The timing was perfect for what Sarah and I were building. That's impressive work. Creating new analytical models while managing your regular responsibilities must have been challenging. It was, but that's what separates real executives from middle management. You have to be willing to innovate, to push boundaries that other people are afraid to cross. Jessica's voice was getting louder as the bourbon took effect. David represented everything wrong with traditional financial services. Risk-averse, incremental thinking, unwillingness to challenge established patterns. The industry needs disruptors. People like you. Exactly. People who understand that success requires taking calculated risks and making difficult decisions. She finished her bourbon and signaled for another round. That's why I'm being promoted to Regional VP next month. The board recognizes real leadership when they see it. Over the next hour, Jessica detailed her rise through Meridian Financial with the pride of a general recounting battlefield victories. Each success story she shared contained elements I recognized from my own work, methodologies I'd developed, Insights I'd published, all repackaged and presented as her original thinking. She was building a comprehensive confession without realizing it. "The beautiful thing about corporate America," she said, slightly slurred now from the alcohol, "is that perception becomes reality. If you can convince people you're brilliant, you become brilliant. If you can convince them you're innovative, you become innovative. Success is just sustained performance art. And if someone challenges your version of reality, then you destroy them before they can damage your reputation." Her smile was cold, predatory, like that pathetic analyst who tried to claim I'd stolen his Peterson Group strategy. Nobody important believed him, because why would they? "I'm an executive VP at Meridian Financial. He's an unemployed junior analyst with an axe to grind." The casual cruelty in her voice was stunning. She wasn't just talking about professional competition. She was describing the deliberate destruction of her own brother's career as if it were a minor tactical decision. What if he had proof? Proof of what? That I improved his mediocre presentation and used it to achieve something he never could have accomplished himself. Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Even if he could prove I'd seen his original work, which he can't, so what? Ideas aren't copyrighted. Execution is everything." By 9 o'clock, Jessica had consumed enough bourbon to lower her inhibitions significantly, while remaining coherent enough to provide detailed accounts of her various schemes. She'd admitted to stealing intellectual property from multiple sources, deliberately sabotaging colleagues, and lying to senior management about the origins of her strategic frameworks. She'd also made it clear that she viewed these actions as shrewd business tactics rather than ethical violations. "I should probably head home," she said, checking her expensive watch. "Early morning tomorrow. The regional VP transition is going to require a lot of preparation. One more round. This has been educational." "I bet it has." She stood, slightly unsteady but still elegant. "You know what your problem is, Marcus. You think the world owes you something just because you work hard and play by the rules. But success isn't about fairness, it's about recognizing opportunities and having the courage to seize them." She leaned down and kissed my cheek, her perfume mixing with the scent of bourbon. "Thanks for the inspiration, little brother. I couldn't have done any of this without you." After she left, Sarah appeared at my table within minutes, her face flushed with excitement. "Please tell me you got all of that." "Every word. The audio quality is perfect." She showed me her phone, which displayed a recording file over 90 minutes long. "Marcus, she just confessed to everything. Intellectual theft, professional sabotage, fraud, lying to executives. It's all here. Now we just need to prove it. Actually, I think the hardest part is over. She gave us a roadmap to every crime she's committed. Now we just need to document the evidence to support each confession." Over the weekend, Sarah and I worked with the intensity of investigative journalists breaking a major story. We cross-referenced Jessica's admissions with publication dates of my original work, creating a timeline that demonstrated her systematic theft of intellectual property. We documented David Walsh's performance history and compared it to Jessica's analytical framework that had justified his termination. We even found email evidence of Jessica intercepting client communications and modifying reports. By Sunday evening, we had assembled a comprehensive case file that painted a picture of professional misconduct so extensive that ignoring it would make Meridian Financial's board complicit in fraud. "The question now is how we present this," Sarah said, reviewing our documentation for the dozenth time. "If we just dump all of this on Harrison's desk, Jessica will claim we're disgruntled employees with personal vendettas. What if we don't present it to Harrison?" "What do you mean?" "I'd been thinking about this problem all weekend, trying to understand the power dynamics at Meridian Financial and identify the most effective pressure point. Harrison hired Jessica. He promoted her. He's invested in her success, which means he's also invested in covering up her failures." I pulled up Meridian Financial's corporate structure on my laptop, but the board members who are evaluating her for regional VP don't have that same investment. If anything, they'd want to know about potential liability issues before finalizing such a significant promotion. Sarah's eyes widened as she understood the implications. You want to go directly to the board. I want to go to someone who has more to lose from this scandal than they have to gain from protecting Jessica. I pointed to a name on the organizational chart, Margaret Foster, chairwoman of the board. She's been with Meridian Financial for 30 years and her reputation is built on ethical leadership and risk management. If this story becomes public after Jessica's promotion, it reflects directly on her judgment. How do we reach someone like that? Very carefully, and with irrefutable evidence that she can't ignore. Monday morning I drafted the most important letter of my professional life. It was addressed to Margaret Foster and marked confidential board level review required. The letter was clinical in tone, focusing on factual documentation rather than emotional appeals. I described the pattern of intellectual theft, the evidence of professional sabotage, and the potential legal liability Meridian Financial faced if they promoted someone whose entire career was built on fraud. The supporting documentation was organized like a legal brief, with each allegation backed by timestamps, publication records, audio transcripts, and corroborating evidence. Sarah had provided internal documents that demonstrated the scope of Jessica's misconduct, while I'd contributed the original source material that proved the theft. This is either going to destroy Jessica's career or destroy both of ours, Sarah said as we prepared to hand-deliver the package to Meridian Financial's executive offices. At this point I'm okay with either outcome. We waited until Tuesday afternoon when Jessica would be in client meetings and unavailable to intercept communications. Sarah used her employee access to deliver the package directly to Margaret Foster's executive assistant, along with a note requesting an urgent confidential meeting to discuss material information relevant to pending board decisions. The response came faster than we'd expected. Wednesday morning I received a call from Foster's office requesting my presence at a private meeting Thursday at 2 p.m. The location was not Meridian Financial's offices but a law firm downtown that specialized in corporate compliance and risk management. Ms. Foster has reviewed your submission and believes it warrants serious consideration, the assistant explained. She's asked our legal counsel to participate in this conversation to ensure proper procedures are followed. Thursday afternoon I found myself in a conference room that screamed serious money and serious consequences. Margaret Foster was exactly what I'd expected from her corporate biography. A woman in her early 60s with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of composed authority that came from decades of making difficult decisions. She was accompanied by 2 lawyers and, to my surprise, Richard Harrison. Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. Foster's handshake was firm, her voice steady. Before we begin, I want you to understand that this conversation is being recorded and that any statements you make may be used in legal proceedings. I understand. Good, Mr. Harrison has already reviewed the materials you submitted, and he's expressed some concerns about their authenticity and your motivations. She gestured toward Jessica's supervisor, who looked like he'd aged 5 years since Monday. However, the allegations you've made are serious enough that we felt obligated to investigate them thoroughly. Harrison leaned forward, his expression hostile. Marcus, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but accusing a respected executive of theft and fraud is a serious matter. Jessica has explained the Peterson Group situation, and frankly, your version of events sounds like sour grapes from someone who couldn't handle professional competition. Have you listened to the audio recording? I've heard selected portions that could be interpreted in various ways. People say things when they're drinking that don't necessarily reflect reality. Margaret Foster raised her hand to silence Harrison. Actually, Mr. Harrison, we've had the entire recording analyzed by professionals who specialize in audio authentication. The conversation is genuine, and Miss Chen's statements are quite clear. She turned back to me. The question we need to resolve is whether those statements reflect actual misconduct or simply the kind of competitive behavior that's common in our industry. One of the lawyers opened a thick folder and spread documents across the conference table. I recognized my own work, various published papers, presentation slides, methodological frameworks,
arranged chronologically next to Jessica's versions of the same material. We've conducted an independent analysis of the intellectual property claims, the lawyer explained.
The similarities between your original work and Miss Chen's subsequent presentations are too extensive to be coincidental. We're looking at systematic appropriation of copyrighted material spanning over 18 months. Harrison's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Jessica is one of our most innovative strategists. Mr. Harrison. Foster's voice was patient but firm. We've also investigated the David Walsh termination. Miss Chen's analytical framework that justified his dismissal was derived almost entirely from methodologies published by Mr. Chen 6 months before she presented them as original research. David Walsh was incompetent. His performance reviews were modified after the fact. The second lawyer interrupted, consulting his notes. We found digital evidence that several of Mr. Walsh's client reports were altered before reaching your desk. The original versions paint a very different picture of his performance. The room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Harrison stared at the documents spread across the table like he was seeing them for the first time. What exactly are you alleging? He asked finally. Margaret Foster's expression was grave. We're alleging that Jessica Chen has built her entire career at Meridian Financial on stolen intellectual property and deliberate sabotage of colleagues. We're alleging that she's committed fraud on a scale that could expose this firm to significant legal liability. And we're alleging that her promotion to regional vice president would represent a catastrophic failure of due diligence that could destroy our reputation in the industry. What do you want from us? Harrison's voice was barely above a whisper. We want the truth, I said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Jessica destroyed my career and David Walsh's career. She's probably destroyed others. She can't be allowed to continue. Foster nodded approvingly. Mr. Chen, we appreciate your courage in bringing this matter to our attention. However, I need you to understand that pursuing this formally will likely result in criminal charges and civil litigation that could last for years. I understand. Good. Because we've already contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This level of fraud in the financial services industry is a federal matter. She stood, indicating the meeting was over. Jessica Chen's promotion has been suspended pending investigation. Her access to company systems has been revoked, and she's been placed on administrative leave. What about her current position? Terminated, effective immediately. As I walked out of the law firm and into the bright Seattle afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Not satisfaction exactly, and certainly not happiness, but a sense that the universe had been nudged back towards something resembling justice. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a photo of Jessica standing outside Meridian Financial's office building, holding a cardboard box and looking like she'd been hit by a truck. The message below was from Sarah. Sometimes the best people really do win. That evening, alone in my apartment with a glass of the bourbon Jessica had bought me, I realized that this story was far from over. The investigation would take months, the legal proceedings possibly years. Jessica wouldn't go down without a fight, and she had resources and connections I could only imagine. But for the first time since that disastrous Monday morning when everything fell apart, I felt like I was finally fighting back on my own terms. Jessica had taught me something valuable about how the game was really played. Now it was time to show her what happened when someone who actually understood the rules decided to play for keeps. The federal investigation moved with the deliberate speed of a glacier, but Jessica's reaction was immediate and volcanic. Within 24 hours of her termination, my phone started ringing with calls from reporters, lawyers, and former colleagues who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. By the end of the week, the Seattle Times had picked up the scandal with a headline that made my stomach clench: investment exec accused of systematic fraud by unemployed brother.
The article painted me as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge against his more successful sister. Jessica's quotes were masterful pieces of spin, portraying herself as the victim of a vindictive sibling who couldn't accept her achievements. She'd hired a crisis management firm within hours of learning about the investigation, and their strategy was simple: destroy my credibility before the facts could speak for themselves. Marcus Chen has struggled with employment stability and substance abuse issues for years, Jessica told the reporter, fabricating problems I'd never had. This appears to be an attempt to blame others for his own professional shortcomings. I'm confident that a thorough investigation will vindicate me completely. Reading those words felt like being punched in the chest by someone wearing brass knuckles. Jessica wasn't just defending herself, she was trying to obliterate my reputation so thoroughly that no one would believe anything I said. The substance abuse allegation was particularly cruel because she knew I'd struggled with anxiety and depression after our father's heart attack 2 years earlier. She'd twisted my brief use of prescribed medication into a narrative of instability and unreliability. The next morning brought worse news. Henderson Associates had decided to pursue legal action against me for breach of confidentiality and corporate espionage. Greg Thompson appeared on a local business program, explaining how the firm had trusted me with sensitive client information, only to have that trust betrayed in the most egregious manner possible. This incident has damaged relationships we spent years building, he said, his face a mask of professional disappointment. We have no choice but to seek damages for the harm Mr. Chen's actions have caused our reputation and our business. I was being sued by my former employer, investigated by federal agents, and publicly humiliated by my own sister. The isolation was complete and crushing. Old colleagues stopped returning my calls, networking contacts mysteriously became unavailable, and even casual acquaintances seemed to avoid eye contact when we passed on the street. The only person who stood by me during those dark weeks was Sarah Hoffman, and even she was paying a price for her loyalty. Meridian Financial had placed her on administrative leave pending the investigation, effectively ending her career in Seattle's tight-knit financial community. We met regularly at a diner near Pike Place Market, two pariahs comparing notes on our shared destruction. I got a call from my landlord yesterday. She told me over coffee that had grown cold while we talked. Apparently someone contacted him with concerns about my character and reliability as a tenant. 3 guesses who that might have been. Jessica's trying to make it impossible for either of us to rebuild our lives. She's succeeding. I've applied to 47 positions in the last 3 weeks. The few companies that bothered responding said they'd decided to pursue other candidates. Sarah stirred her coffee absently, creating small whirlpools that reminded me of the chaos Jessica had introduced into our lives. I'm starting to think we underestimated her. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we won this battle but lost the war. She's gone, but she's taking us down with her. In 6 months, no one will remember the details of what she did, but they'll remember that we were involved in some kind of messy corporate scandal. The thought had occurred to me as well. Justice and victory weren't necessarily the same thing, and at the moment it felt like we'd achieved neither. Jessica was facing federal charges, but she'd also successfully painted herself as the victim of a family vendetta. Her legal team was already floating the idea that the evidence against her had been obtained through illegal surveillance and corporate espionage. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Margaret Foster's office. The board chairwoman wanted to meet again, this time without lawyers or formal procedures. Just a conversation between 2 people who'd found themselves in an impossible situation. We met at a small restaurant in Fremont, the kind of place where business executives went when they didn't want to be seen conducting business. Foster looked tired, older than she had during our previous meeting, like the weight of the scandal was aging her in real time. "I want to apologize," she said after we'd ordered. "When you brought this matter to our attention, I thought we were dealing with a straightforward case of workplace misconduct. I didn't anticipate the collateral damage this would cause. You mean the damage to my reputation? I mean the damage to everyone involved. Your sister has turned this into a war, and wars tend to destroy everyone who participates in them. Foster sipped her wine carefully, choosing her words with obvious deliberation. The federal investigation is moving forward, but it's going to take months, possibly years, to resolve. In the meantime, all of us are living under a cloud of suspicion and innuendo. Are you suggesting I should have stayed quiet? I'm suggesting that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than we expect to pay. She leaned forward slightly. But I'm also here to tell you that Meridian Financial recognizes the courage it took for you to come forward. We believe you saved us from a catastrophic mistake. That's nice to hear, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm unemployable. Actually, it might. Foster reached into her purse and withdrew a business card. We're creating a new position, Senior Director of Ethics and Compliance. The job would involve reviewing our internal procedures, developing protocols to prevent future incidents like this one, and serving as an independent voice for employees who witness misconduct. I stared at the card, trying to process what she was offering. You want to hire me? We want to hire someone who's demonstrated that they'll prioritize truth over personal convenience. Someone who understands the real costs of corporate fraud and has the moral courage to fight it. Foster's expression was serious, almost grave. The salary is competitive, the benefits are excellent, and the position comes with a guaranteed 3-year contract regardless of how the current investigation resolves. What about Sarah Hoffman? Miss Hoffman will be offered her previous position with a promotion and a significant salary increase. She's also being nominated for our annual Ethics Award, which comes with a substantial cash bonus. The offer was everything I'd hoped for and more, but something about the timing felt wrong. Why now? Why not wait until after the investigation? Because we need to demonstrate that Meridian Financial stands behind people who do the right thing. If we wait until after the legal proceedings, it looks like we're rewarding you for winning rather than for having integrity. Foster finished her wine and signaled for the check. Think about it, Marcus.
You've spent the last month being punished for telling the truth. Don't you think it's time someone rewarded you for it? That evening, I called Sarah to share the news. Her reaction was immediate and emotional relief mixed with vindication and a healthy dose of suspicion. It's too convenient, she said, after I'd explained Foster's offer. They're trying to buy our silence. Maybe they're trying to do the right thing. When has corporate America ever tried to do the right thing without an ulterior motive? Sarah's cynicism was understandable, given what we'd been through. What happens if Jessica's legal team gets the charges dismissed? What happens if this whole thing gets swept under the rug? Then we still have our jobs and our integrity. And Jessica wins. The conversation haunted me through a sleepless night. Sarah was right to be suspicious, but she was also wrong about the nature of victory and defeat. Jessica had already lost everything that mattered to her: her position, her reputation, her carefully constructed persona as a brilliant executive. Even if the federal charges were somehow dismissed, she'd never recover from the public humiliation of being exposed as a fraud. The real question was whether I could rebuild my life while the investigation continued, or whether I should wait for complete vindication before moving forward. Foster's offer represented a chance to turn the worst experience of my professional life into the foundation for something better. But it also meant accepting that justice might be incomplete and that some questions might never be fully answered. 2 days later, I met Jessica for what I knew would be our final conversation as siblings. She'd requested the meeting through her lawyer, ostensibly to discuss a possible settlement that would end the federal investigation. We met at a neutral location, a hotel lobby downtown, where the ambient noise would prevent eavesdropping and the public setting would discourage emotional outbursts. Jessica looked different, not just older or more tired, but fundamentally altered in some essential way. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the weight she'd lost, and her perfect makeup couldn't disguise the hollow look in her eyes.
She'd aged years in the space of weeks, transformed from a confident executive into someone who looked perpetually frightened. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was smaller than I remembered, lacking the authority and certainty that had always defined her. "Jessica." We sat in facing chairs separated by a coffee table that might as well have been a chasm. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and abandoned affection. "I want you to know that I never intended for things to go this far," she said finally. "When I used your presentation, I thought it would just be a one-time thing, something to help me get through a difficult period. And David Walsh was destroying his career, also a one-time thing." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. David was a different situation. He was blocking my advancement, undermining my authority with the team. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions in business. Difficult decisions. Is that what you call destroying innocent people's lives? I call it survival. Her green eyes flashed with something like her old fire. "You've never understood what it's like to fight for everything you have. You've always been Dad's favorite, the responsible one, the one everyone believed in. I had to work twice as hard just to get half the recognition you took for granted." The accusation was so fundamentally wrong that I almost laughed. "Jessica, you were the golden child. You got the designer clothes, the expensive education, the connections that landed you a management position straight out of graduate school. Material things, superficial advantages." She leaned forward intently. "But you got something I never had. You got their respect. Dad believed in your abilities, trusted your judgment, was proud of your accomplishments. With me, everything was conditional. My success was never enough to earn their approval, only their temporary tolerance." For a moment I glimpsed the wounded child beneath the corporate sociopath. Jessica had always seemed so confident, so certain of her place in the world, that I'd never considered she might be struggling with the same feelings of inadequacy that had plagued me throughout our childhood. "That doesn't justify what you did." "No, it doesn't." She sat back, the moment of vulnerability passing like a cloud across the sun. "But it explains it. And maybe that's enough. The federal investigation isn't going away, Jessica. Neither are the civil lawsuits or the professional sanctions. Your career in financial services is over." "I know." Her voice was steady now, resigned. "My lawyers think they can get the federal charges reduced to misdemeanors if I cooperate fully with the investigation and make restitution to the affected parties." "What kind of restitution?" "Financial compensation for the people whose careers I damaged. David Walsh, you, even Miss Hoffman." Jessica pulled a document from her purse and placed it on the table between us. "I'm prepared to offer you $2 million to settle all claims and agree not to pursue further legal action." The number was staggering, more money than I'd earned in my entire career. It was also irrelevant. "I don't want your money, Jessica." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to know that you can't destroy people's lives and then buy your way out of the consequences." I stood, preparing to leave. "Most of all, I want you to stop being my sister." The words hit her like physical blows. Her composed facade cracked completely, revealing the raw pain underneath. "Marcus, please. We're family. Whatever else happens, we're still family." "No, we're not. Family doesn't do what you did to me. Family doesn't try to destroy each other for personal gain." I looked down at her, this stranger who shared my DNA, but none of my values. "You made your choice when you stole my work. I'm making mine now." I walked away without looking back, leaving Jessica alone in the hotel lobby with her settlement offer and her hollow apologies. It was the last time we spoke. The federal investigation concluded 8 months later with Jessica pleading guilty to securities fraud, wire fraud and conspiracy charges. She received 18 months in federal prison and was permanently barred from working in the financial services industry. David Walsh received a settlement that allowed him to retire comfortably, while Sarah and I used our portions to start a consulting firm that specialized in corporate ethics and compliance. The morning Jessica was sentenced, I received one final text from her. No words, just a photo of the view from her prison transport bus as it crossed the mountain pass, heading toward the federal facility where she'd serve her sentence. It was a gray, overcast day, and the mountains looked harsh and unforgiving in the distance. I deleted the message without saving it, and went back to work on a presentation about the importance of ethical leadership in corporate America. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jessica's betrayal had ultimately led to the most fulfilling work of my career. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things we achieve. 3 years later, Sarah and I had built our consulting firm into one of the most respected ethics practices on the West Coast. We'd helped dozens of companies improve their internal controls and prevent the kind of systematic fraud that Jessica had perpetrated. The work was meaningful in a way that analyzing portfolios had never been, and every client we helped felt like a small victory against the forces of corporate corruption. Our parents attended Jessica's prison release ceremony. I did not. They sent me photos of the reunion, hopeful that enough time had passed for our family to heal. But some wounds don't heal, and some betrayals can't be forgiven. Jessica had taught me an important lesson about the difference between family and loyalty, and I'd chosen to remember it rather than forget it. The last I heard, she was working as a bookkeeper for a small non-profit in Portland, a job that required no creativity, innovation, or strategic thinking. It was honest work, the kind that didn't offer opportunities for the manipulation and exploitation that had defined her corporate career. I hoped she'd found some measure of peace in that simplicity, but I no longer cared enough to investigate. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing Jessica, if I wish I'd handled the situation differently. The answer is complicated. I regret that it was necessary, and I regret the collateral damage it caused to our family relationships. But I don't regret choosing truth over loyalty, justice over family harmony, or principle over personal comfort. Jessica's text from Hawaii had been meant to humiliate me, to demonstrate her victory over the brother she'd always seen as competition. Instead, it became the catalyst for her own destruction and my eventual redemption. She'd taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who know us best, and that sometimes the most painful lessons are also the most valuable ones. The consulting firm Sarah and I built was called Integrity Partners, and our motto was simple: truth has a way of surfacing. We'd learned that lesson the hard way through betrayal and investigation, and the slow, difficult process of rebuilding trust in institutions that had failed us. But we'd also learned that telling the truth, even when it costs everything, is the only way to build something lasting and meaningful. Jessica had wanted to bury me quietly, to keep me small and silent while she celebrated her stolen victories. Instead, she'd forced me to become someone stronger, more principled, and ultimately more successful than I'd ever imagined possible. The brother she'd tried to destroy had become the man she could never be, someone who chose integrity over advantage, truth over convenience, and justice over family loyalty. In the end, that was victory enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.